Welcome everybody. Glad to be here this morning to introduce Battalion Mapped on behalf of UPL. My name is Chad Effertz. I lead the North American Development Organization, and part of my team here, Ryan, will speak as well on the product Battalion Mapped and all the work he's done in research today. So I want to kind of set this up a little bit. We originally had NDSU professors scheduled to come and give a little background on the weed resistance situation in wheat, and I'm going to try to do my best to represent since they had a few conflicts and couldn't make it. And one of the key messages here is the need for full rate herbicides as a way to manage weed resistance. And so I'm going to touch on that today, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ryan to talk about Battalion Mapped more specifically and what it is. But to give you an idea of what the product can do, it's got a number of attributes. It's a cross-spectrum product, so you're going to get grass and broadleaf control in one product. It's primarily for control of kochia, wild oat, and foxtails, even though it has numerous other broadleaf and grass weeds on the label. Those are key driver weeds in that northern spring wheat market and part of winter wheat as well. And so this product will be an excellent fit for that. It does have 3 modes of action, and so that's, I think you heard even in the previous talk if you happen to be here, it's really kind of the key approach to managing weed resistance long term is to have at least up to 3 modes of action for a particular pest, and specifically for kochia in this case. It is a fully loaded, so to this point of full rate herbicides, it is a fully loaded herbicide with an industry leading formulation. We do have excellent crop safety. If you think about the ingredients that are in here in the 3 modes of action, it's flucarbazone, bromoxynil, and fluroxapyr. They all have very long track records of excellent crop safety, and so you're going to be able to see that in your fields, and it's certainly shown true in our research. Ease of use, and I think the last real key kind of attribute is flush after flush control. So the flucarbazone molecule for your grass control also has residual, and so when we're out there early and you get that rain and you get that flush weeds the next day, you're going to be able to pick those grasses up as they emerge. So take a little step back and set the table on weed resistance and why we need full rate herbicides. Obviously weed resistance is a pain point for all growers, no matter if it's just wheat or what crop you're growing. And weeds can become resistant in multitude of ways. And I listed 3 here because they're kind of primary, but you can alter the site of mode of action, and so you basically have an enzyme that's not responsive. That molecule is not going to bind anymore, and that's why it's important to have multiple binding sites in your modes of action to control those. And so that's certainly one way that a Battalion Mapped is going to address weed control is with those multiple modes of action. You have other ones like gene amplification, and you'll see with kochia here as an example. That's a particular problem for glyphosate on kochia, and so we lost the activity of using glyphosate as a burn down in your no-till acres, and that's causing existing problems. And then metabolic resistance is one that you're seeing more, particularly in amaranthus, and you'll see from UPL, particularly in other crops as well, recommending pre-emergent herbicides because they can kind of overcome metabolic resistance better than post-emergence. And so all of these are kind of 3 things we're paying close attention to and trying to address with our new products coming forward to work on those kind of 3 areas that weeds become resistant on. From a wheat grower specifically, the key weeds that are resistant to glyphosate in this area, you've got horseweed, kochia, and the amaranth species, and like I said, that really becomes problematic in starting with a dirty field because you've lost the activity of a burn down in those no-till acres. And then we do have group 1 and group 2 resistant grasses, and with flucarbazone being a group 2, we really like to see that rotation. So in your rotational crop, whether it's typically a broadleaf before your wheat, and group 1's products are used in that, and then a group 2 works well in that wheat acre to break up those rotations. So those are some of the overriding issues around weed resistance, and more specifically to talk about kochia here. You do have resistance in kochia to glyphosate. The group 2s, all your old ALS chemistry. You will see some even to fluroxapyr, and so that's a certain challenge for wheat growers around kochia. And like I mentioned before, one of the biggest problems is that lack of a good burn down product, especially in spring wheat where you're burning down in cold weather. It's hard to get activity out of some chemistries in that case, and if the glyphosate's not working, your kochia is getting of size by the time you're coming in to control it with your wheat. Lack of control options in rotational crops. So if you got pulses or you got your soybeans and you've got resistance there that you can't control, again, as you're rotating into that wheat year, this is the year you really need to get control of those weeds before you rotate back out. And then, so some of the best practices we'd like to see is, again, that crop rotation using those multiple different modes of action in those alternate years. Certainly, where you have a lack of burn down is either using fall residual or spring residual to get ahead, and then to really maximize the effectiveness of your current products you have available in wheat, and that's kind of what I want to turn my talk to now. Really back to the message around full rate use of products. So maximizing the effectiveness of what we have, got 5 different ways here to do it. So you definitely want to use full rates so that we get the most out of each component you have. And in case one is resistant, the other component is going to pick that particular weed up. You definitely want at least 2 modes of action in that mixture to control those resistant weeds. And so in this case with kochia in particular, all 3 chemistries are active on kochia, and so it's really going to be important for using Battalion MAP as a tool in your wheat to manage it on your farm long term. Application timing is another one. Again, how do you maximize the control of your herbicides? Obviously, bromoxynil is a kind of burning chemistry. You have to have smaller weeds. Fluroxapyr, if you've used that in the past, you want to get it early and then use your crop competition to snuff the rest of that out. And then flucarbazone with its residual activity is going to allow you to go early and then take care of any subsequent flushes. So we really like to see with Battalion MAP that early application timing. Obviously, spray gallonage with contact herbicides, not going out there at 5 gallons, is not going to maximize the use of your products, so you definitely need more water to make a contact herbicide work. Again, if you think about kochia, those mats of pressure you get with a lot of weeds in small areas, definitely need all that kind of coverage to control them. And then again, the effective use of formulations and adjuvants. So our formulation's been designed with not only the active ingredients but the inert components to maximize activity, and Ryan will show a lot of that information going forward. So just a last slide here for me, and then I'll turn it over to Ryan. How is UPL kind of approaching weed resistance, and in this case particular to wheat? Certainly we want to bring products to market like Battalion MAP with 3 modes of action. We think that's going to be an important tool going forward for managing weed resistance. We want to increase the recommendations and use of pre-emergent herbicides because they really address that lack of burn down and also the metabolic resistance. We're certainly heavily involved in seeking new and novel chemistries to give you more tools going forward, and we hope to have future announcements about that in a number of crops in future years. And then lastly, really stewarding those products you have today. We do have to make best use and longevity of our products we have, and we think with Battalion MAP is an excellent example of these approaches, where certainly with the 3 modes of action hitting point number 1, and then from a stewardship standpoint, we're using those full rates to make sure we're maximizing that activity and really using our agronomic recommendations to maximize its performance. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ryan, let him introduce himself, and he'll give you more details on Battalion MAP.
Great, thank you, Chad. I appreciate it, and thank you to everyone for being here. I'm a technical services manager for UPL in the southwest part of the United States. Happy to be here this week and get to share a little bit more about you with Battalion MAP herbicide. So Chad touched on some really good points of what really makes Battalion MAP stick out from the crowd, and one of those key pieces is the active ingredients that's been brought together in this product. So when you look at it from that standpoint, 3 modes of action with 3 chemistries. So we have flucarbazone, and with that 16 fluid ounce use rate, the flucarbazone component of Battalion MAP will be equivalent to about 2 fluid ounces of Everest. We're looking at right at a pint of 2-pound bromoxynil product like Maestro, and then right at 4.4 fluid ounces of a product like Starain Ultra. These are, in my opinion, very complementary active ingredients. We look at it from a contact plus systemic activity, all at full rates. With the barboxanil piece, we see that and know it to be true, where we get that really high efficacy on those smaller weeds, so 2-inch kochia or less. That fluroxapyr gives a little bit more flexibility in terms of weed size, but obviously still the smaller the better, especially when going after kochia. And then that flucarbazone component. We know it to have excellent grass control, especially on such things as green foxtail, wild oats, and gives that residual control as well. So that's a nice complementary piece to it. We look at some other aspects of Battalium Amped. We touched on those modes of action, groups 2, 4, and 6. This is all in an OD or oil dispersion formulation. This is a formulation type that UPL has really perfected over the last few years. And Battalium Amped is going to be a great example of this type of formulation, and I think you'll be very impressed with the consistency you'll see in the field. And with that consistency too, it's not just limited to the formulation, but it's also part of the performance. So we see grass and broadleaf activity plus residual, and we pick that all up with a 16 fluid ounce rate. Going to be able to apply it in a very flexible timing. So with good crop safety, you can apply this through a wide growth stage window with your wheat, target that to where it's most effective to the weeds, and not have to worry so much about crop safety. Apply it anywhere between 2 leaf and 60 days before harvest on spring, winter, or durum wheat. And Chad did a really great job summarizing a lot of these key features and benefits with Battalium Amped. That broad spectrum control is really key. A premium product like this, it's going to pick up the most troublesome weeds we know to be true in wheat. So those wild oats, green foxtail, and especially kochia is where it really finds a strong fit. Outside of that, though, it's also labeled for a variety of other weeds. So 11 grasses, 53 broadleaf weeds, very long list when it comes to that piece of the label. And those multiple modes of action are really what helps it to excel, touching all of those spectrums of weeds, that fully loaded formulation, and then the crop safety that comes with that. Really leading safener technology is going to be found in Battalium Amped, so you can have good confidence in its application, knowing that it's going to be very tough on the weeds, but very soft on your crop. And with that, we get that flush after flush control. So that great residual piece, especially when we look at things like flushes of green foxtail, wild oats, being able to pick that up with the Everest component of Battalium Amped. And then that formulation technology, something that's really going to perform well in the field, but also be very stable and perform very well in the barn as you have that over the winter as well. And to give you a quick idea, just the weeds that it does control, we touched on those key ones, green foxtail, wild oats. We look here on the broadleaf side, it's a very long list, but kochia is one of the big ones that sticks out. We're going to pick up and do very well on things like common lamb's quarter, wild buckwheat, ragweed, some of the mustards, and then looking at red root, spiny pigweed as well, seeing Battalium Amped have a good fit on those acres. And really with any herbicide program, though, it's not so much about what you do in season that's very important, but what you do in those subsequent years as well and around that application. So being able to rotate crops and have wheat in that rotation is really key, especially when it comes to resistance management. And using Battalium Amped, when we look in the geographies of North Dakota, Minnesota, Montana, and South Dakota, going to have very flexible rotation intervals for a lot of those key crops in rotation. So year-on-year rotation will vary a little bit based on soil pH, but when you look at it for such things as sunflower, STS soybeans, or conventional soybeans, sugar beets, alfalfa, corn, it's going to fit nicely into those rotations. Just there, look at your soil pH and how it's going to fit, but you are going to have multiple rotational options to really drive home that resistance management and incorporate Battalium Amped into those plans. Tank mixing is going to be another important aspect. With Battalium Amped, it's going to be very strong control over a list of weeds. But if you do have the need or the desire to tank mix, it's going to be flexible when it comes to tank mixing options. One of the ones that we really recommend as a combination product with Battalium Amped would be our Audit herbicide brands. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, those are our 2 different ratios in the 1-to-1 and 4-to-1 formats of thiophansulfuron and tribenuron. So plugging that in or other herbicides with Battalium Amped, you're going to have that flexibility, whether you want to introduce multiple modes of action or maybe expand the spectrum to a more niche weed, it's going to have that flexibility to do so. The formulation, though, is obviously really key. This is something in the tech service role where we try and vet, not just during the summer when we're looking at performance, but also how is that product performing over the winter in different storage conditions. So if you have some left over, you come back next spring or early summer, it's not going to cause you issues. I've got a lot of confidence in this Battalium Amped formulation. We put it in cold storage in this first video playing. So it's been in cold storage its entire life since I received it, and before this, even give it a 4-hour ice bath. Product temperature at that pour was about 50 degrees, and you see it come out very nice and smooth, nice consistent pour. And then we look here just for comparison, product in ideal storage. You see it come out of the jug very easily. Prior to this pour, each of them just received a slight shake for about 20 to 30 seconds. and no difference really between them regardless of storage condition. So good, strong, stable formulation, perform well in the field, but also when you're trying to get it mixed and loaded up, do very well for you in that capacity as well. We'll kind of get into a little bit of what we've seen more on the replicated research side, looking at all the field trials we've done. Kochia is really the big one. We've got good options with the grass control, but kochia is something that we really need to manage strongly. It's incredibly competitive with the crop, as you all know, and it can be very difficult to control in some other crops as well. So a lot of the broadleaf crops, it can be challenging to control kochia at a high level. But when we look at such opportunities with wheat, there are some good options, and Battalium Amped is going to be one of those. So there's multiple chemistries available for kochia management. Still have some good effective modes of action that control it, like bromoxynil and fluroxapyr. And the key with this is that wheat's going to be a great opportunity to get ahead of kochia, ahead of those rotational crops where it can be more challenging to manage it. So we look at Battalium Amped and where it fits in. Those full rates, multiple modes of action, and then those 3 active ingredients coming together. And a key piece with that is that there currently is no known resistance of kochia to bromoxynil. So that's going to fit in very nicely with that resistance management piece. And you see those active ingredients complement each other very well in how it performs. So when we look at a lot of the data I'll show here today, how a lot of these graphs are going to be set up is on that x-axis, you're going to see competitive comparisons. So we're going to compare Battalium Amped to other products on the market, Husky Complete, Perfect Match, Resuvant, see how it stacks up. When you look at those different color bars on the graph, it pretty much just represents a different point in time after that herbicide was applied and those ratings were collected. So an easy way to visualize it is more of a time lapse of weed control for those respective species across that growing season. So we see here we've got Battalium Amped on the far left on both of these graphs, and when we look at kochia control from this past summer in Hettinger, North Dakota, we saw it come in at 98% control 27 days after that application was made. You compare that to other products on the market like Husky Complete, Perfect Match, and Resuvant, the control for those products range from anywhere from 75 to 91%. So this is going to be a consistent trend you'll see from Battalium Amped, is comparing it against the other good products on the market, but it's going to lead the pack and perform at a very high level, which has been really exciting to see in these research trials and as we move forward more of these commercial settings. You see a similar trend here in Minot just from this past summer, neck and neck with Husky Complete, but outperforming Perfect Match and Resuvant to the tune of about 10 to 11%, depending on which product you're looking at from that Battalium Amped formulation. A quick visual behind it, the plots we had here in Minot, you see that untreated check there on y'all's left. So it's going to be filled with a lot of things like horseweed, kochia, and some foxtail mixed in. And then you come over the top with that 16 fluid ounce rate of Battalium Amped early on, and it does an incredible job in cleaning up that broad spectrum of weeds and performs very well in terms of that efficacy on the weeds, but also the crop safety. And we touch on that kochia piece, but I mean, we can't forget about the grasses. Stuff like green foxtail and wild oats can be very detrimental to any of our yield potential with wheat. So it's important that we've got a product like Battalium Amped that continues to perform and do very well on that spectrum of weeds. And it's something we continue to see as this formulation's in the field. So similar setup for these graphs again. There on y'all's left, you'll see Battalium Amped compared to those other 3 competitive standards for green foxtail control in Minot in 2022. Finished with 98% green foxtail control. You compare that to the other products on the market, Perfect Match was at 69%, Husky Complete 53%, Resuvant at 57%. And I'll note at this location it was ACCase resistant green foxtail, so a product like Resuvant is not going to pick much of that up, as you see here. But when we put in a product like Battalium Amped, performs at a very high level, controls those weed spectrums very well. Wild oats is another troublesome one. One note with this trial, there in Fargo, was applied to pretty much fallow ground or no crop was sown due to weather conditions. So it's essentially just looking at what do these active ingredients do when it comes to controlling these weeds in the absence of crop competition. And it's a good trend we continue to see with Battalium Amped. Despite no crop competition, it still performed very well, controlling that wild oats at a tune of 83%, where the rest of the field was at 67.5 to 77.5%, depending on which product it's being compared to. And a quick visual for that, so that's that same trial I just referenced with wild oats. This was taken about 60 days after that application was made. So residuals are going to start to wane at that point, especially with no crop competing with it. And you look there at that untreated check, just a massive density of wild oats. And then where that Battalium Amped was applied, you're starting to see that flush come now that we're 60 days into it. But at the same time, the difference in weedy biomass from that check to the Battalium Amped plot was night and day difference. And we show how Battalium Amped has that finishing power and how tough it is on these weeds, but at the same time, we got to be sure we're safe on the crop. And that's something I'm continuing to be excited about with Battalium Amped. This is a Minnesota location we had just this past summer. Similar graph format, but here in Battalium Amped, 7 days after treatment, there was a little phyto, 6.7%, You compare that to the rest of the field, though, and it ranged anywhere from 8.3 to 13.3% early on. You go to that 14-day interval, any sort of phyto as a result of that application has dissipated. Crop looks completely normal, but then you look at the rest of the field, it ranged from anywhere from 6.7 to 16.7%. So what we're really seeing is industry-leading crop safety, but also industry-leading performance of this herbicide in the field. A little bit more data to show you from our Fargo location. So in this particular trial, Battalion Amped is in the green, Husky Complete is in the gray. Comparing it against some of the troublesome weeds like kochia, common lamb's quarter, see those products being neck and neck. And then Battalion Amped actually lead in the field in terms of controlling that yellow foxtail at this location. Ended up increasing control by about 5% versus that standard. And a visual from that same location, you see how thick it was with the common lamb's quarter, a lot of grass mixed in there as well as and kochia, and you see Battalion Amped at that 16 fluid ounce rate really clean it up and do a very nice job in terms of its performance. We talked about kochia, and that's a very troublesome broadleaf weed, but we can't forget about some of the others. The common lamb's quarter is going to be really important, and we continue to see very strong performance from Battalion Amped in those situations as well. So the treatment I'll really point out to you is going to be that second one, Battalion Amped tank mixed with audit herbicide, and you see it, or if it's just Battalion Amped by itself, perform very well going after common lamb's quarter, anywhere from 95.5 to 98.3% at this particular location, really leading the pack when you start looking at things like perfect match and Resuvant in terms of how it performs versus the competition. And we see that same trend with weeds like wild buckwheat, another troublesome one when you get into the pockets of it. And you can have that same confidence that you have with the kochia control with Battalion Amped or Battalion Amped plus audit tank mix. Going to do very well on stuff like wild buckwheat as well and perform at a very high level. This is just a quick case study too. I think it does a really good job of highlighting the difference in control, even if it's a small difference, what that can do to yield potential. So we look at this first graph on the left, and it's just looking at percent control of wild oats at a Minnesota location we had last summer. So Battalion Amped was at 99% control. The rest of the field was at anywhere from 96.3 to 97.7%. So really only about a 2 to 3% difference, but we saw that reflected at the end of the day in yield potential or what was achieved in that environment. Wild oats, even a small difference in control can lead to big differences when it comes to what does that weed competition lead to for its effect on yield, and we see that really play out here. So even though Battalion Amped was only about 2 to 3% better in this situation, that made a big difference when it came to yield potential. The rest of the field yielded anywhere from 77.9 to 78.6 bushels per acre. That Battalion Amped plot that achieved 99% control, it was at 83.8 bushels per acre. And you see just the effect the competition had, an uncontrolled check yielding only 19 bushels per acre. So just one location, but it does a good example of showing what does a little bit of weed competition do to our yield potential and why it's so important to maximize that control with a product like Battalion Amped. This is a product that we'll have fully commercially available for 2023. Very excited to really see it expand its acreage and footprint, and I think a lot of people are going to find some really tremendous success with it, whether it's battling foxtail, wild oats, or kochia, or a variety of other weeds. Battalion Amped is really going to set the new standard, allow you to achieve a level of unmatched control that hasn't really been realized to this point with a novel product like Battalion Amped to find an exceptional fit on those acres. But with that, I'd love to open it up to any questions you might have, and Chad and I are here to answer those as best we can. Do you have anything, Kathy, or anything I might have missed?
Yeah. One question, if you guys can expand on, what's the outlook for our wheat market when we head into the future? Can you guys, Ryan, Jed, would you like to expand on that?
Yeah, so I see it being very positive. You know, wheat's really a staple crop throughout the U.S., and it's got a lot of really great pockets, or I shouldn't say pockets, but very wide geographies where it's a viable cropping solution, whether that's winter wheat or spring wheat. I think the key for it is just having management tools available that can allow you to maximize those acres. A flexible product like Battalion Amped, I see it finding a fit on a lot of those acres. So as wheat continues to play its important part in the United States and abroad, products like Battalion Amped here at home are really going to find a fit and allow us to maximize the production on those acres.
I think I can maybe add to that a little bit in that I think wheat going forward, you look at you like to rotate that in after a broadleaf crop, break up disease cycles, etc. And we're really struggling with weed control in broadleaf crops today. In wheat having modes of action that are quite different than you have available in your broadleaf crops, it's really a nice tool to have that cleanup year in wheat prior to, rotating back to a soybean, pulse crop, canola, you name it. So I definitely think it's a strong fit in your full farming practice.
No, yeah, very well said. That's an excellent point with it.
Thanks, Chad. Thanks, Ryan.
We
Question?
got a question here.
Yeah, so you talked a lot about the plains and weed management and weed. What about the Southern Corn Belt? Do you see a fit for the product in the Southern Corn Belt? Kentucky, Southern Indiana, Southern Illinois, Missouri?
I would say a lot of it's going to depend on the spectrum. I live in Amarillo, Texas, so I won't mess with that as far as saying I know exactly what's going on there. I'm sure if you're from there, you probably know a whole lot better than me. I guess I'll kind of ask you, what is the main weed species or spectrum that you really see battled in that area?
Well, we have grass weeds like little barley, downy brome, ryegrass. We also have mare's tail as an issue. Early emerging summer annuals like giant ragweed as well. So
Gotcha.
does it have a fit on those, or don't know for sure?
I would say on the broadleaf side, that would be good fits. On the grass side, it could be a little bit more pocketed in a geography like that. Really going after like the foxtail and wild oat acres, that's where it'll find its best success as far as being broad spectrum control across those acres. Broadleaf, though, I mean, it's very strong on a long list of broadleaf weeds, so I think it can find good fits there. It's just going to be a matter of what's the grassy weed spectrum and what's the best method to control those specific species.
Chad, the gentleman mentioned brome grasses. Any comments on what we have coming in the future?
Yeah, so we have, to that, maybe Battalion Mapped might not be the best option, but we are in our pipeline looking at mixture products that may are more effective on ryegrass and your brome species, particularly for winter wheat. Timing emergence of when you get those grasses coming versus when your broadleaf's coming sometimes don't match up very well for a full spectrum product like this. So if you get some fall emergence of your grasses, you're going to want to get out there early, and we'll have products that we'll probably talk about here next year on that'll address those needs.
Yeah, that's a good coming soon piece. So
Yeah.
encourage you to come back and talk to us about it next year. So we'll be excited to share more.
Watch for it after September. Another thing about Battalion Map, just want to make sure everybody has this information. We are offering 3 different pack sizes this year on Battalion Map. So it'll be offered in a 2x2.5, 120, and we are limiting our 250-gallon totes this year. But feel free to reach out to any one of us here for additional information, or we have our RSM in the Northern Plains here also to answer any questions that you might have on Battalion Map. But we do appreciate everybody joining this session. If you would like additional information, we do have some brochures at the doors there that you're welcome to pick up and take with you.
And swing by our booth for a chance to win a Yeti cooler. But we appreciate all y'all's time. So thank you again very much, and really grateful for this opportunity. So y'all have a good day.